Hello and welcome to the Ellen Made Book Club and our second ever book club session. Today we're talking about The Wager by David Grann, Piranesi by Susanna Clarke, and As Long as the Lemon Trees Grow by Zoulfa Katouh. And before we start, I just have a couple of things I want to mention. First of all, I just want to say thank you to everyone who's reading along with me. It makes it so much more fun to read these books together. And second of all, I want to give a little warning that this video may contain spoilers for some of these books. If you're not sensitive to that, you can just keep on watching. But if you do plan on reading any of these books and you don't want to know too much, I would recommend you just skip ahead to the June wrap-up video, which is coming soon, especially for Piranesi and As Long as the Lemon Trees Grow. I feel like those two are kind of difficult to talk about without spoiling them. And especially for Piranesi, if you have any interest in reading that book, I would recommend going in as blind as possible to that book. Just skip those parts in this video if you're interested in reading that, and that's absolutely fine. And then you can come back when you have read it. There were a few people who asked questions on the community post, and I just thought I would read them out now, and then I'll get to answering them as we go along. So the first one is from Chelsea at Libraries and Lattes. Did any of these books remind you of other books you've read? Did they meet, exceed, or not live up to your expectations? And would you read any other books by these authors? So those questions go for all of these books, and I'll get to them as we talk about the books. Nikki at My Messy Bookshelf asked, for Piranesi, did you guess how it was all going to play out? And were you satisfied with how it ended? And then for The Wager, did you take sides between the factions? And then Laura at Booklover Laura asked, is The Wager super dense? I'm not the biggest nonfiction reader, but I'm intrigued by it. So thank you so much for those questions, and I'll get to them as we talk about each book, and let's get going. So let's start with The Wager by David Grann. This is a nonfiction story that the author has pieced together from historical records and logbooks from the seamen who were on this ship, The Wager. The Wager was a British ship that was sent in a fleet of several ships from Britain on a secret war mission to South America. Like it says on the cover, there is shipwreck and mutiny and murder in this story, and a lot of other things. I listened to this on audiobook, and it was the first out of these 3 that I read this month, so I don't have a physical copy to flip through, and it's been a while, so I might not get all of the details right, but I'm sure you'll let me know if I get something wrong. I really enjoyed this book. I don't read a lot of non-fiction, so I guess I had a little bit of fear that it might be a bit dry, but I had heard good things, and I liked it. Like I mentioned, I listened to this on audiobook, and I thought it was very well narrated. I did listen to this a little bit slowed down, like at 90% or something like that. The sentences are structured in a different way in a nonfiction book than in a fictional story, I think, and this was quite advanced for me. Like English is not my first language, so I did need to slow it down a little bit, and it took me a while to get into the way that this was narrated and written. I got into it, and it got easier as I got used to it, but at the start it was a little bit like this is going to be a difficult book to listen to, but it was fine. I just slowed it down a little bit. I also felt like there were a lot of people to keep track of, like the different captains and the different roles on the ship, and those terms are not something that I'm familiar with, unless it's like the cook and the surgeon. I know what those are. Like the captain, but yeah, like all of the military ranks and like the sailor words, it's not something that I'm familiar with, but that was like, I feel like those titles and roles were repeated throughout the book, so it wasn't something that I had to remember or like know to understand the story, and like it was still a good story to listen to, even though I didn't like have all the facts super clear in my head, like it doesn't really matter. So the story starts in Britain as they are like prepping the ships and getting the crews together. And there are like so many people on these ships. So we don't get to know all of the men on the ships, but we do get several different characters or like people on these ships that have all written their own logbooks and their own like notes on what happened on their journey. And that I think makes the story come alive a lot more compared to if it had only been the captain who told everything. Like now we get different perspectives, and there's different perspectives on some things that make the story a lot more interesting. Like not everybody remembers the same event the same way. It also brings it down to a very human level compared to like a textbook in school, which is like kings and nations and war decisions, and it's all very like high up. And this is more like in their bodies and in their hammocks where they sleep, the environment that they were in, like the weather, and being close to other people in that like confined space. And yeah, it just made it a lot more human. And also like the thought process, or like the different people have different reasons for being on that boat. Like some people might not have had a lot of other choices, or they're doing this to get money and bring that home to their families. And some people do it for like ambition and like climbing the ranks. Like people have different reasons for what they're doing. I think this is the most difficult book out of these three to have a discussion about, like for a book club, because it is nonfiction, it is history, it's things that actually happened, and there are things that are like so obviously not good, like the whole colonialism thing. I think we can all agree that that was not a good idea. There were a lot of interesting things that happened, and it was interesting to see sort of how their experiences were of being on this ship, like going through the storms and you know, having to work together with so many different people that all have their different tasks, you know, what they ate and how they slept and how they handled death on the ships, because there were a lot of people who died on this journey from different reasons. The politics on board were also really interesting, and the politics when they had shipwrecked, all of that was really interesting, but I don't really have a lot to say about it other than like, yeah, listen to this book or read this book. It's really good. But I don't really have a lot to discuss about that. There were a few things that stood out to me, and these might be spoilers, so just be aware. The first one is that they had a free black man on board. Like one of the sailors was a black man, and it was said like he was a free black man, which implies that a normal black man is not free. That was very uncomfortable and horrible and just wrong. And like I know that that was of the time or whatever, but that stood out to me. And then the other thing was when they were shipwrecked on this island, and there are these like indigenous people who show up and help them, like provide them with food and like try to help them to clothe them and like get them off this island. And what do? They start like grabbing their women. Just like, I don't know if that's part of the reason why I don't find this as interesting to discuss, is that they're just men. They're just men doing man things. There are these white British men who decide that they're going to go and conquer the world or whatever, or they're going to fight the Spaniards who have also gone off into the world and conquered. And then they're like on this ship that they built to go and conquer things. And they fight, and they are brothers, and they live life on this boat. But then like they're about to be saved, and there are women there, and so they start like groping them. And it's just like, can you not? Like, can you, like, your life literally depends on these people helping you, and you just can't help yourself. And it's just that it might not have been all men on the ship doing that. So like, and so the men, like their husbands or whatever they call themselves, get mad and like, well, we're not going to help you if you're going to assault our women. Bye. And they leave them there. And it's just, I understand that it's like been months or whatever, but it's just like, if you're going to be like that, you can just stay on the island. Like, just stay there. Like, just, we don't need you to come back. The other thing that I found the most interesting was when they had crashed onto the island and how they were solving things then and sort of setting up their own little society with different little villages on this island, and how they still maintained some sort of law and order, even though they were like on this island where no one can see what they're doing. They still find that they have to have rules and punishments for the people who don't follow the rules, because otherwise everyone's gonna lose. Like, everyone's gonna be negatively impacted by the bad decisions of a couple of people, like when they're starting to steal everybody's food and things like that. So let's get into the questions that Nikki and Chelsea and Laura asked. And Nikki asked, did you take sides between the factions? And so the factions are these different groupings of people. Some people stand by the captain, basically, and some people don't. Maybe that's simplifying it a little bit, but that's the gist of it. I tend to side with the underdog in any situation, and I feel like if I had a captain and we were shipwrecked, I would hold him kind of responsible, and I don't think that I would remain loyal to that person. And also, the captain is supposed to be the last one to leave the ship if and when it sinks, or like when they crash, he's the last person to get off the ship and onto the island. So to me, it just kind of makes sense that if there's limited space on a little boat that's going to take them away from there, it does make sense that they would leave the captain. And, you know, like, what's the difference between being the last off the ship and being the last off the island? I'm not typically going to side with the old white guy in charge. Like, that's just not where my instinct is. So yeah, I think I sided with the mutineers, I guess. I would be very curious to hear who you sided with, Nikki, and if anybody else had a different opinion or the same opinion, or what your thought process behind that was. Laura at Booklover Laura asked, is the wager super dense? I'm not the biggest nonfiction reader, but I'm intrigued by it. I wouldn't say it's super dense. I'm not a big nonfiction reader either, and I still enjoyed it. It didn't feel like a textbook to me, or like just a listing of facts. Since we have these like logbooks, it's a lot more on a human level, their struggles and their joys and like their wants and ambitions in life and experiences woven into it. There's also a lot of like suspense and action, and like a lot of things happen on this journey, and it's an adventure to listen to. And all of the facts are woven into this adventure. So yeah, I would definitely go for it if you're intrigued. So Chelsea at Libraries and Lattes asked, did it remind you of other books you've read? I don't think so. The only thing I can think of is like Pirates of the Caribbean. Like, it's not the same, but like that's the closest thing I can associate it to. So no. Did it meet, exceed, or live up to your expectations? I would say this met my expectations. I'd heard a lot of good things about it, and it's very clear on the front what it's about. It's like shipwreck, mutiny, murder, and there's a ship on the waves, and all of that is exactly what it delivered, and then some. But I was expecting it to be a little bit more than exactly what was on the cover. So yeah, I would say it met my expectations. Would you read any other books by this author? Yes, I'm definitely interested to read Killers of the Flower Moon, and there are also a couple of other titles that he's written before that I would be willing to try. I also saw that Killers of the Flower Moon was made into a movie, which I was not aware of, and that The Wager is also going to be made into a movie with Scorsese and DiCaprio, and so I would definitely want to watch that. I think that would make a great movie. I think that's all I had to say about The Wager for now. Please let me know in the comments if you have any other thoughts on anything or any questions about it, whether you read it or not. I did see a sort of presentation by David Grann about this book, so I will link that in the description. If you're curious, you can check that out. And yeah, let's get on to the next book. I took a little break, but I'm back now. So let's talk about Piranesi by Susanna Clarke. I love this book. It's my favorite book of the year so far. I love everything about it. Yeah. Again, if you haven't read this book, please read it. Please skip this whole part because I'm gonna spoil it for you. You're gonna miss out on a great book, and I don't want that. So if you haven't read this book yet, please skip this part, okay? I knew nothing going into this. I had only read Piranesi lives in a house, perhaps he always has. I thought that Piranesi was this guy. I don't know if that's what you were meant to think. I don't know if that's what other people thought. I thought that this was like a mythological creature and it was just, a mythological retelling. It was not. I loved everything about this. I loved the writing, I loved the story, the mystery or like the puzzle of it. I liked the twists and the reveals and the ending, and there was nothing about this that I didn't like or enjoy. I love also that it's the perfect length. I was very confused reading it, but like in the best of ways. It's very thought-provoking, and I think that it's like in a mystery, it's kind of easy to give clues and like give little bits of information, but it's a lot more difficult to make the reader ask questions. I couldn't stop my wheels from turning. It just from reading what I was reading, I just had so many questions. I started taking notes on the questions that popped into my head, and these might not be all of the questions that I had reading. It's just like once I started taking notes of it and when I remembered to take notes. Why does the other have more things? Who were the dead? Where did they all come from? Who built the house? Does it matter? Battersea? Question mark, question mark, question mark. Is it all an illusion? Is he imagining things? Who is telling the truth? Who's manipulating who? Are there more people somewhere? What world and time are we in? Is it all an experiment? Is it a cult? Question mark, question mark, question mark. When and why did he tear out the pages? There was like brainwashing and sowing doubt and the questioning your own thoughts and the memories and all of that. Anyways, those were the questions that popped into my head that I took note of. I don't usually annotate in my books and I don't use tabs, but in this one I have dog ears everywhere. The first one is on page 16. He's talking about the faun, the statue of the faun, like this one on the front. And it says, I dreamt of him once. He was standing in a snowy forest and speaking to a female child. And so in my mind, that's Narnia. And so my thought was like, he's been in our world. He's somehow in some other place now. For some reason, if he's imagining it or hallucinating it, or if he is in like a heaven sort of place, or what's going on. But he has been in our world where Narnia is. And this is also kind of like a Narnia with like, instead of a closet, there's like a doorway with a candle. The next dog ear is on page 60, which I just took a note, like page 60, religion, because that's what it made me think of. And this whole book is like very religion-esque. Anyways, it says, this realization, the realization of the insignificance of the knowledge, came to me in the form of a revelation. What I mean by this is that I knew it to be true before I understood why or what steps had led me there. A bit further down, it says, I realized that the search for the knowledge had encouraged us to think of the house as if it were a sort of riddle to be unraveled, a text to be interpreted, And if ever we discover the knowledge, then it will be as if the value has been wrested from the house and all that remains will be mere scenery. The sight of the 192nd Western Hall in the moonlight made me see how ridiculous that is. The house is valuable because it is the house. It is enough in and of itself. It is not the means to an end. That to me is a perspective on religion that I can relate to. I'm not like against religion in any way, and if you're a religious person, I fully respect that, and I think that religion has a lot of power and a lot of place in people's lives. But I also think that in some people's interpretation of religion, life is just the means to an end, and I think that's kind of sad, and I'm sure there are people who think that my way of thinking is sad as well, but for me that's what this passage meant, or that evoked for me, in that life is beautiful and our planet is beautiful, and there is value in appreciating that in and of itself. Like, it's not just the means to an end, like getting to heaven or nirvana or whatever after this life. So yeah, for me there were a lot of elements or maybe parallels to religion. And then there's the other aspect of this, which is like the psychology and the mental health or illness. One of my notes was like, it reminded me of the Gollum and Smeagol situation, but kind of in reverse, where he has this like split personality as a trauma response, basically. Like, he has taken on this whole new persona to protect Matthew. Either way, I felt very sorry for Piranesi. He's been thrown in this prison and manipulated into thinking that he has some kind of purpose there, to the point where he believes that himself, and to the point where he has created this persona to protect himself. And yeah, it's torture in all kinds of ways, and his family is missing him, and it's just horrible all around. And I think the part that's like the worst is the questioning of himself, and that's what made me write, like, is this a cult? Like, because that's the kind of manipulative things that are being used in cults. It's like constantly questioning yourself, and like, no, it's probably me, and like, no, that was probably me. I was crazy back then when I did those things. And in reality, you're crazy now, or you're being manipulated into thinking that what you're doing now is the right thing, when actually you're just being a puppet for someone else and doing what benefits them in some way. And that is just one of the cruelest things I think you can do to somebody. Okay, let's get into your questions. So Nikki asked, did you guess how it was all going to play out? No. And I mean, it says on the very first page, like the quotes in the start of the book, give you a lot of information, but I didn't register that, and I did have the question, like, is this an experiment? But there were so many options, there were so many interpretations in my mind, and so many questions that I was lost in this world with Piranesi and in his way of thinking, and like, I knew I could see signs that he couldn't see, obviously, but I didn't know. And I really love that I went in as blind as I did, because knowing anything more about it would have ruined it for me. I would love for you to answer that as well. Did you guess the ending, or was it a surprise to you, or what did you think about that? Were you satisfied with how it ended? I was mostly happy with the ending. I liked that he didn't just immediately leave just because someone said so. Like, this has been his place of comfort for so long, and his home, and what he has like devoted himself to. I also liked that there wasn't this like instant romance thing with Raphael. It would have been so easy to all of a sudden they're like all lovey-dovey, and that would be very strange, especially for like that power imbalance where he's like just coming out of this manipulated, brainwashed state, and she's a police officer there to rescue him. There were hints of a little spark, between those two, I thought, and I didn't think that was necessary. So it was like just towing the line of what was acceptable to me, but it like just about passed. And it wasn't too perfect. It was an imperfect reality of someone who has been through a traumatic experience, and that experience is sort of over, but the person is also forever changed by it. Please let me know in the comments what you felt about the ending. I would love to know. Chelsea asked, did this book remind you of any other books you've read? And this one actually did. I said this to my boyfriend like at the very start of reading this, because he was like, is he good? And I was like, it's a mix of Circe, The Wager, and The Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime. It reminded me of Circe in that it had this like solitude and isolation. There's a focus on the work, and there's also this like ethereal feeling to it. It reminded me of The Wager in like the water, obviously, like the tides, and also this feeling of shipwreck, and also the distrust and like the psychological manipulative dynamics. And then it reminded me of The Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime, in that it's this like kind of naive diary of really mundane things, written by a person who has a different sense of reality from me. And this diary sort of starts out as one thing and then turns into something different. So yeah, I see elements of those 3 books in this book, and I loved all of those 3 books. So this is like the perfect storm. Did it meet, exceed, or not live up to your expectations? It met my expectations and exceeded them, and also surprised me, and also made me very confused, and I loved it. Would you read any other books by these authors? Yes, I would definitely want to read more from Susanna Clarke. I would like to read what's it called? Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell. I don't have the same expectations of that, like I don't have as high expectations of that, but I would like to read that. So when I had finished, I went back to the quotes in the beginning, and that's when I felt very stupid, but also I am the great scholar, the magician, the adept who is doing the experiment. Of course, I need subjects to do it on. And that is from The Magician's Nephew by C.S. Lewis. So I felt I was at least right about the fawn in the snowy forest with the female child. And then there's a quote from Lawrence Arne Sales. And of course, this is the character in the book, but I didn't know who that was. So I was just like, that's a random old dude that I don't know who it is. And that happens a lot. So not going to spend any more time thinking about that. I started watching a review by someone who said they hated this. I didn't watch the whole thing. I just watched a couple of minutes, and he was like, if I have to read The Year of the Albatross one more time, I'm gonna lose it. It's just like, I thought this was fantastic, partly because all of the different like layers and themes and thought-provokingness of it, and like the religion and the manipulation and the mental health and the science and the other world and the puzzle and all of that. But I also think that it was just beautiful writing. It was really like stepping into someone else's mind, and it was a lot of not knowing who to trust and not knowing what the truth was and what is even real. And so even without the like parallels to our real world, it's still a great story, like just as it is, without the associations that I got. Love it. I can't wait for my boyfriend to read it. I can't wait to talk to him about it. And I also can't wait to hear your thoughts in the comments. Please put like spoiler warnings on your comments, just in case anybody's here to watch the other parts, like the other books. Like do that for all of the books, obviously. But yeah, especially for this one. Okay, moving on. Let's get to the third and final book, which is As Long as the Lemon Trees Grow by Zoulfa Katouh. This is set in Syria, and we're following Salama, who is a 19-year-old young woman. She is a student, or she's been a student to become a pharmacist. But then since the revolution in Syria started, she's now working at the hospital as a surgeon, basically, because like there's not a lot to choose from, and she has some medical knowledge. So it's like, do what you can. You're the best we've got. She's lost her mother in a bombing, and her father and her brother have been imprisoned. So the only one she has left is Layla, who is pregnant. Again, reminder, this may contain spoilers. So Layla is working at this hospital, and then she meets this man who is, I think, a year older than her, named Kenan, and he also has 2 younger siblings that he's taking care of. There's a romance sparking between those two while they're trying to manage survival in this war zone and trying to decide whether to stay in Syria and trying to help with the hospital and with the revolution and everything, and protesting, or if they should leave Syria for Germany as refugees. So this book obviously deals with survival in a war zone, the thought process that goes through someone's head when it comes to like, what's my duty to my country? Do I stay and fight, or do I try and save my own life and get out of here and try to have some impact from the outside? There's also this character called Kof, which I forgot to mention, who is this like demon-y kind of figure who appears to tell her to leave, basically. And we later find out, like, spoiler, he's pretty much the embodiment of fear. And so he's doing everything he can to protect Salama, but like out of fear. It's a really beautifully written book, and it's a beautiful story. And yeah, I thought it was very good. It's marketed as a young adult novel, and I think that that's accurate. Like, it read a little bit youthful to me. It's not my favorite book of all time, but I really see its merits, if that makes sense, and I enjoyed it as well. And I was moved by it, and I thought it was a good story and a good depiction of life in a war zone. I don't want to take away from someone's experience or like say anything negative about someone's story that is this, but like, I'm talking about the book. And in the book there were certain things that I liked and certain things that annoyed me, and that's what I want to talk about. The first thing that annoyed me a little bit with this book, but I also see the merit of it, is the references to anatomy and like the very physical feelings and experiences. That feels very intentional, and the way it landed with me is sort of taking the reader into this horrific experience and environment, and like sensory experiences, like walking on rubble and like feeling the stones push up through the sole of your shoe. Like, that's something that anybody can relate to and makes it a little bit more real, putting that experience into the body of the reader, which I think was very well done. Having said that, there were certain places where I wish that they weren't there, but again, I feel like that was intentional. Like, when they're having a romantic moment, it's not like getting warm all over. It's like my heart was in my esophagus, or like blood was pumping through my veins. It's like very the anatomical terms for everything. I thought that was kind of annoying sometimes because I get grossed out by that. But I also think that it's intentional in like putting that in there, partly because she's a pharmacist and the author is also a pharmacist, I think. But I also think that it's meant to sort of jolt you a little bit and like make you remember that, yeah, sure, this is a very cute moment, but like the houses are still falling apart around you, or like we could die any second, and like there could be a bomb or a sniper can shoot us. So as much as he's like looking into my eyes, I could die right now, reminding you that even the sweet moments are painful and dangerous. The second thing that annoyed me was this concept of allowing things to happen to people. And this is both in terms of like the family dynamic and also in terms of like global politics. Like in terms of the family, it's like, how could you allow your mother to die? It was like she's being bombed to death. Like that's not on you. That's not your responsibility. When someone else drops a bomb and your family member dies, that's not your fault. Like you didn't allow for that to happen. There's a lot of talk like that, and I can understand, survivor's guilt and that there is a lot of duty and loyalty to your family and you want to protect each other and you want to take care of each other. And, it's like, it's just something that we say, like, I would never allow anything bad to happen to you. But it's not about allowing that. And especially when there are people who are so actively trying to hurt people and doing bad things, like it doesn't matter if you allow it and you say, no, we can't do that, they're going to do it anyway. And there's also the same concept of allowing things to happen on like a global political scale, in that they're saying things like they're going to show the world what's happening here and what they are allowing to happen. And I feel like that's kind of the same thing. We're putting the responsibility and the blame on someone else other than the people who are actually doing it. And that bugs me. Like, I would love for there to be a contract where it's specified when a country can intervene and, for humanitarian reasons, but there isn't a clear rule for that. And so you can't just like claim supremacy 1 second and say like, we make all of the decisions in our country for ourselves. That's not for other countries to decide. And then when things go bad, you say, well, you're allowing things to happen to us now. And like, I know I sound very cynical saying that, and that's not my nature. Like, that has to be a contract made beforehand so that we can step in when aid is necessary. But we're not allowing things to happen. There's no like global police to say when you're doing something wrong. And I mean, there probably should be, but like, that's also scary. So it's not so black and white. It's not so easy to just say like, other countries should do this and that. And I'm talking about like on a political level. I'm not talking about my human level. Of course, I would want to run in and scoop them all out of there and save them and like give them a home and a safe place to be. And I would love for them to like pick up their own country and take that with them, with their family and their language and their culture and all of that. I would love to be able to do that, but I can't. Same as within a country, like all of the power you're giving to a government, imagine giving that to some kind of global government. That is scary because governments don't always do nice things, which is why there was a revolution in Syria. So I don't know, this concept of like allowing things to happen. We do have responsibility for each other as human beings, but please put the blame where the blame belongs. The third thing that I wanted to discuss, I feel like is an obvious point of discussion, and that is when Salama sort of bargains with this little girl's life. There's this character called who is the one who provides the boats for the people who want to flee, and it's very expensive to get a place on these boats, and Salama doesn't have all that money. And so when brings his daughter to the hospital and she's injured, and Salama just takes a second to say, well, give me a spot on the boat and I will save your girl. And she's like waiting a little bit too long. Salama has this whole like guilt trip afterwards, and like blaming herself and thinking that that was a very bad thing for her to do. I understand what the problem is. Like, I agree that a doctor should not put their patients in danger. But like, she's also putting herself in danger every single day by staying there, and she is staying there to help the people in the hospital, the patients. And so I feel like she has a little bit more wiggle room for that kind of thing. And also, like, this character is blaming her and like continuing to say that Salama did such a bad thing, and like, oh, I'm gonna tell your boyfriend about this, and threatening to expose her. And it's just, to me, that was like, but you're her dad, like, you're the father of this little girl, so you're running into a hospital with your girl in your arms, and the only person who can save you says like, I'm gonna need something in return to save your girl. Like, the appropriate response would be, of course, anything. I will give you anything for you to save my little girl. Is that not what a father would say? But he's like, I can't believe you're negotiating right now. I think that's not really fair. And he's like dragging it out as his daughter is bleeding from her neck. As much as I understand that Salama maybe did a little questionable thing, of course, but I think that the dad, is just as much in the wrong. And also, he's also doing, like, selling these spots in the boats for really expensive. So it's not like he's some angel. Like, he's also exploiting this whole situation. He's even says that this, like, refugee business is booming kind of thing. And he's making a profit off of that. Like, he's staying because he's making such good money off of people who want to flee. So, like, it bothered me a little bit that was never addressed. Like, that his response was not like, I will give you anything, just save my daughter. He's just like, eh. There were other parts that I really liked and thought were really beautiful, like most of the book. And there were definitely parts that I was moved by and like affected by. There were a lot of injuries mentioned, and like most of them didn't really affect me, or like, but then this like chemical attack happened, and that is just so cowardly and cruel and horrifying. And I just, yeah, that really got to me. And then also, spoiler alert, when Salama realizes that Layla is no longer living either, that also brought me to tears. I just started bawling because it was just such a betrayal of her mind. She's also like having this trauma response and defense mechanism that she's seeing this Cough character who is her fear, and then she's also seeing Layla, who is like her comfort, and she's just not ready to give her up, so her mind keeps her alive. And then she just realizes that she's not been there for months. Yeah, that was also a very emotional moment to read. And also the little brother, Yusuf, Kenan's younger brother, who has like shut down and is not talking anymore. And yeah, I just felt very bad for him, and I was very happy to see him sort of come to life a little bit toward the end of the book. I also liked the romance aspect of this, which was a little bit surprising to me because I'm not like a big romance reader, but I did like that the romance story it felt realistic. It was not like super straightforward. They both had integrity and their own opinions, and it was not just like this, magical days. They had arguments and different ways of thinking about things, but they still wanted the best for each other, and they wanted to be together if they could. It felt youthful but not juvenile. I thought their story was really sweet and realistic, and yeah, it was very easy to imagine being in their shoes in terms of the romance. I thought the ending was good, and I liked the lemons reoccurring. Yeah, I thought that was a very nice way to infuse hope throughout the book. Like, Cough was there to represent the fear, and the lemons were there to represent hope, and it made the read feel a little bit lighter as well. And yeah, I really appreciated that. So to finish off, I want to answer Chelsea's questions. Did this book remind you of any other books you've read? And I don't think so. Did it meet, exceed, or not live up to your expectations? I think this met my expectations. I knew going in that this was going to be an emotional and beautiful story set in Syria during the revolution, and that it's a YA story, and I think that's exactly what it felt like to me. So yeah, I feel like it met my expectations. Would you read any other books by this author? I'm not really sure. I'm not opposed to it. I don't think I would read another YA story from her, but if she were to write something more adult, I would be open to reading that. I think she's a great writer. It was beautifully written and the story was well crafted, so open to it if it's a little bit more adult, and I would be curious to know what else she would write about. So I realized I haven't asked as many questions to you during this video like I did in the last video, but you know, if you have any thoughts or opinions about anything that I've talked about in this video, please let me know in the comments. And also, like, don't be afraid to talk to each other. You don't have to just like talk to me. If you see a comment about a book you've read and you want to answer that person, please go ahead. The next video will be about the books that we're reading in July, and those are Parable of the Sower by Octavia E. Butler, 1984 by George Orwell, and A Man Called Ove by Fredrik Backman. And then in August we're reading Pachinko by Min-Jin Lee, and The Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller. And if you want to join us and read any of these books in any of those months, you are very welcome to do so. The videos will stay up, and so you can come back to them when you have read any of these books. And yeah, everyone's welcome anytime. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed this video. Please chat away in the comments and let me know what you think about these books. I hope you're having a fantastic day, and I will see you in the next one. Bye. Did you take sides between the factions? 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 Did I write factions or did you write factions? Is that right? I don't know. Is it called factions? I don't know. It's factions. Okay. In Swedish, it would be fractions. In English, it's factions. I don't know why. Okay.